Welcome back to today's pod. Today's guest is the pioneer in sustainable finance and a heavyweight in the world of capital markets. Neil Auerbach is the founder and CEO of Hudson Sustainable Group and a former partner at Goldman Sachs. He's managed billions to help shape the future of clean energy investment and has been at the forefront of connecting purpose with profit long before ESG became a buzzword. We're diving into the mindset of what it takes to walk from Wall Street to going and building something game-changing on your own, this massive opportunity in the climate-focused investments, and why the smartest money in the world is moving towards sustainability. If you care about business, impact, building generational wealth while solving global problems, this one's for you. Let's get right into it. All right, Neil, we're here. We're finally doing this.
I'm excited.
Thank you for making the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And I have a few questions for you.
Absolutely.
And I want to start with your upbringing in history in New York and how you got started on Wall Street there.
Okay, so I started off living in Queens. I like to say to people when I'm introduced to them that I'm a nice Jewish boy from Queens. So that's I grew up there actually my whole life until I went away to college. Actually, I spent my first year at Queens College. I started college at 16, and then 17 my parents let me go to SUNY Albany. Wow. And then from there went to law school in Boston. So I grew up traditional Jewish home. My father came from Germany, and then he moved to Israel. I came in 2 years before I was born. Actually, no, I'm sorry, 4 years before I was born, and then he met my mom 2 years before I was born, and the rest is history. My mom, first generation American, and so a very traditional home with very strong values.
And what drew you? You went to law school.
Yes.
Were you going to be an attorney at first, or what was your heart set on?
So I went to law school because it's growing up with a very strong Jewish mother was either become a doctor or a lawyer. Right?
I feel like that's
kind of how you just have to make one of those two choices.
Alex Goldstein did the same.
Being an investment banker, now that was obviously a more interesting path, but I think that Jewish mothers they were not brought up themselves with understanding the world of finance. And
non-negotiable.
So that was basically it. Engineering as well. Look, there's a lot of families from my ethnicity that their kids were basically raised to be into finance or engineering and building things, but sort of middle class immigrant, the path was to be a doctor or a lawyer, sometimes to be an accountant. So I basically became an accountant before a lawyer, and I just took that up because I realized that as a lawyer I probably need to know a little bit more about finance from an accounting perspective, and that's ultimately has been invaluable to me.
I feel like it has been too, because everybody that went to school to get their law degree that didn't end up being a full-time attorney, they're doing business or an entrepreneur. You're reading contracts, raising money, whatever you're doing, it ties into it.
Right, listen, I spent the first 10 years of my career as a lawyer, maybe 11 years, and then I ultimately spun out of the profession and became a client. But even today, I'm reading contracts all the time, or lawyers are explaining issues in contracts to me.
Got it.
And so without that experience and expertise, I would have to listen to everything the lawyers tell me.
Yeah, and you would
some of my lawyers would prefer that I always listen to them, but at least I can have an educated conversation and get to an answer that makes commercial sense as well as legal sense.
Yeah, but you have a little background too, so that helps.
Absolutely.
How many years of college?
So I went to school for 4.5 years. I got 2 degrees, and then 3 years of law school, and then 1 year for an LLM in taxation. So not quite as bad as medical school, but it's...
so like 21, 22 years old, you became full-time attorney?
No, this is back, I was...
or younger even?
I was 25 when I finished, yes. I took 9 months off to work because I finished in December of 1979. December 1979, I started law school in 1980.
Wow.
And so I went, so I started in 1976 and graduated in 1984.
Wow, and then you did 10 years of law.
Yes, I did 10 years of law. I spent sort of 8 years on the Wall Street law firms, 2 years of government work. I was an attorney, a senior lawyer for the Internal Revenue Service, the Office of Chief Counsel.
Really?
Which is where everything happens from a policy perspective. And then I went to Morgan Stanley. I was recruited there. I decided not to go back to a law firm. Wanted to be an in-house lawyer. And then for about a year or two doing that before I was recruited to be a banker. And that was an interesting pivot for my life.
I was going to say, so did you have like an aspiration to do that, or somebody just pulled you and gave you an opportunity and you're like, all right, I'm going to go with that?
I'll tell you what, it's an interesting confluence of events. It was a very entrepreneurial culture.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of half of my day, I was effectively helping Morgan Stanley on compliance and tax planning issues and figuring out how to lower the effective tax rate of the company.
Yeah.
It was a great place to work. And then the rest of the time I was basically advising business units that needed tax guidance. So this was about 1995. I was invited to help solve a client's problem, and I ended up building a financial product for them that saved them about $1 million in taxes. And from there, my star was born, because the business units understood that I not only knew how to solve problems, but I can actually drive bottom line for our clients and be able to therefore get more business from Morgan Stanley. And from there, the rest is history. I started basically taking this skill.
How old were you, and not to cut you off, how old were you when you had the star was born? Just because we have a lot of entrepreneurs watching. And everyone times like they got to feel like they got to figure it out at 25.
I would say that entrepreneurs have to have persistence. They need to understand people and things. I mean, in my world, understanding math, but problem solving is probably the most important critical skill that I had training in as a lawyer. I'd like to say, lawyers are divided into two types. There are those who find problems and those who solve problems.
I was going to say create. There's the attorneys that create problems too.
Is definitely here, but there are problem finders and problem solvers.
Okay.
And my reputation as a lawyer, and that translated ultimately very well into becoming an entrepreneur, and I'll explain this phase of my career, was I was really good at solving problems. And so that skill was noticed by people in what we call the front office.
Yeah.
There's actually a great book, I haven't read it in years, but it's called Fiasco, FIASCO, and it stands for the Fixed Income Annual Summer Something Outing. I forgot what the C stands for. And it was written by a guy that I sat next to when I was in the business units, that described the culture of the Morgan Stanley business unit that I actually gravitated to. It was known as the Derivative Products Group. And it was a bunch of very entrepreneurial, swashbuckling guys that were making a ton of money. And I was thrown into that culture to develop financial products, to be able to market to the client base. And so that skill set, having the legal training, but also having understanding finance, understanding math, that was one of my strongest subjects, and really being good at figuring out how to create value out of the skill that I became native to, was really critical and was noticed, and that's how my career in banking got started.
And then Goldman.
Well, it was an interlude. I was recruited. I was recruited for a couple of years I was recruited to Barclays, to Barclays Capital, and to a group called Structured Capital Markets. And the fellow that ran that business unit, his name is Roger Jenkins. He was a client of mine when I was a lawyer.
When you were a lawyer, okay. I was going to say.
And that transaction was, I won't get into the details. Look, it's decades ago, but I remember it was probably the most complicated tax problem that I had to solve.
And you solved it.
And I solved it. And so Roger had me in the back of his mind. So when he was looking to build a U.S. portal for his business, which is probably the most successful tax arbitrage business on Wall Street at the time, I got the phone call, and the comp lift was attractive, and so I made that move. I spent a couple years doing that, actually close to 3 years before I got the call from Goldman, to people that I knew.
That's huge.
I knew the people there from my travels as a lawyer, and so that was a fascinating term for me. And who doesn't take the interview when they get a call from Goldman?
I was going to say.
So that's, it is the the ultimate place to work. There are other tremendous firms, and so I don't want to knock any of the other great firms on Wall Street, but the cachet, the opportunity, and there, the opportunity was really special because Goldman just transitioned in May of 1999 from being a partnership to being a public company, and that's when they went public in May.
Okay.
So I started interviewing with them around that time, and my job that they were hiring me for was to create a brand new business that would be a front office business, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be a business person, an entrepreneur inside a big bank to help them drive value for the bank and for their customers through the tax line. And so one of the most profitable firms on Wall Street, pays a lot of taxes, wants to figure out absolutely the most legitimate ways of structuring to minimize liabilities, and that's what tax lawyers and accountants do on Wall Street. They help their clients mitigate their tax burden.
So you were a 2-for-1 there.
Yes.
But one thing that I have to ask, because I was looking it up and I told my cousin who works at Blackstone about how you were a partner.
Yes.
So there's a cycle every 2 years, is it? That 5,000 people apply and 0.1% or like 50 people get approved to be a partner.
It's about, it ranges between about 90 to 120. 1 year it went down to like 74. I've lost track of the...
74,000?
74 partners.
Partners.
Out of the applicants. So it's a pyramid.
But you made it.
Yeah, I made it. I mean, I made it in 2004. I was turned down in 2002. And the rule at Goldman is you almost have to experience the rejection. It's very rare that someone makes it on the first cut. So I wanted to go like a freight train to be a partner, of course. I mean, you know, what Jewish boy from Queens is not going to be ambitious.
What entrepreneur isn't going to be ambitious?
I wanted to be an entrepreneur, wants to be a partner. But I'd figured out how to process manage and understand how to present myself. So there are a lot of amazing, talented people that do not make partner, that leave before they're even up for partner, and then build unbelievable businesses. So while it is a tremendous accolade, and obviously it was a great honor to make partner there, it was a stepping stone ultimately for me to other career ambitions as they later unfolded in my career.
Did you feel like when you became partner, you were like, all right, I'm the new guy. In your mind, you're like, I'm the new guy on Wall Street. I have some ideas. I have like this great stepping stone that I can leverage, and I have what I need to go do whatever it is. Which this is like 5 years in advance because you left after and started your own thing. But did you feel like that was the time where you were like,
oh, look, I mean, obviously I felt elated at the election to partner, but you know, in the financial world, first of all, you're just beginning to build wealth. I made partner. I joined Goldman at age 40. I already had a career as a lawyer, had a career as a banker, as an arbitrageur, as an entrepreneur inside big banks. So I was recruited, and effectively, an interesting story, I was already an MD, and they said, if you're coming here, you're a vice president, one level down. I said, okay. I'm going to do it. It wasn't a level down in comp, but I had to basically take it on the chin and go one step down before I can be nominated to be a managing director and then to be a partner. And so it was a whole process, and it was basically, and so to answer your question, becoming a partner was really all about a stepping stone to be able to do bigger things. And so it was a platform. It was less a destination than a platform.
Less a destination than a platform.
Right.
Okay.
In other words, a platform that you think of yourself as jumping, almost like a frog, jumping from like pod to pod, right? And you obviously want to be going up, but it wasn't, of course it felt, you know, a sense of accomplishment, but it was a means to an end. And that's how I look at it in retrospect right now.
Is that like also saying it when you've reached the top, where else is there to go, or no?
Well, to a certain extent, look, take the acting world. If someone wins an Oscar, are they going to retire?
No.
No, it's an achievement.
Yeah, it's like what got you to get the Oscar.
Your peers have nominated you for an award that recognizes achievement, a status achievement, something that you've done. So obviously getting there is all about having accomplished enough to be recognized for it,
Yeah.
and then also being recognized for the potential to contribute more. To a certain extent, just like the saying is that life only begins after 40, which you haven't gotten there yet, to a certain extent, life at Goldman, to a certain extent, only begins after you become a partner. And so I saw the opportunities to build a little bit earlier than others in terms of my ascension to partner, to do things outside of the firm. But that's why I said it's more of a platform than a destination.
Destination, got it. Here's the one thing that everyone wants to know, I'm sure, is you were one of the pioneers in renewable energy and in that space, and you deployed billions of dollars for Goldman and was very successful with it. What got you into that sector? And how did you quickly learn so much about it? And not only did you invest billions in a sector that obviously you knew what you were doing, but you didn't know as much as you know now. Right. How did you?
There's an old saying here. I'm going to be the master of cliches.
Please.
In this discussion here. Better lucky than smart. So I want to unpack your question and talk about a few episodes in along the way. Some vignettes. I had been building a business that, in order to accomplish my mission, to help drive bottom line, below the line P&L.
Yep.
What that means is lowering the effective tax rate, right? As opposed to revenue, as I'm lowering the effective tax rate of the firm, but also at the same time bring in revenue.
Right.
So a lot of the transactions I was involved in were lowering the firm's effective tax rate through a variety of means. And what was really important to the various committees that oversaw my work is that I didn't get too accustomed to doing the same thing repeatedly, because it would drive up the risk associated with any failure that might occur with any one of the strategies that I had been employing. So there were several things I was doing at the time, and one transaction that was very much what they call below the line, meaning it drove down the effective tax rate, but it didn't produce top line revenue, was a Section 29 coal credit deal. This was a tax credit that was in the Internal Revenue Code that had to do with it was basically introducing polymers into coal in order to reduce dust emissions. The credit was very, very lucrative. We got a ruling from the Internal Revenue Service, and so everything was done by the book, absolutely, completely kosher. And Goldman wouldn't have it any other way. It was the most incredible environment. You were running the gauntlet every time you wanted to do a transaction. It went through all sorts of scrutiny. At the time, I went for approval to the head of fixed income. His name was Lloyd Blankfein. He became very famous.
Wow.
He ascended ultimately to be the CEO of Goldman. And he was the final reviewer before my investment was approved, along with the CFO, David Vanier at the time. So these were two of the top people in the firm. And what Lloyd told me is, this is the one and only deal you're going to do on this particular platform. After this, you can do other things, but I don't want to do any more coal credits. And I don't want to get into all the reasons why. I understood it. It was an incredibly profitable transaction for the firm. But after I heard that, I realized I had to go somewhere else. Now, again, I had 3 different business units, one in the UK and I had 2 in the US, so I was sort of building my little empire at Goldman.
Yeah.
And what I realized at the time was people had already been knocking on my door wanting to sell me wind tax credits.
So not to cut you off, huge business that you have now that's been amazingly successful for over 25 years now.
Yes.
Was all because you were trying to look for a tax break, and then you became the master of renewable energy.
This is
That's fascinating.
This is the origin story.
That's crazy.
Okay? So it was as a result of being approved to do a deal and then prohibited to do something else. And again, at the time I had about 25 or 30 people working for me, so I had a lot of things to do, all at Goldman.
Okay.
But it was time to then start something new, because again, I was always looking to diversify my portfolio.
So this is 2002, you start deploying for renewable.
That meeting took place sometime in the summer of 2001. I remember it incredibly vividly because I dialed in from, I think it was Williamsburg, Virginia. I was in a phone booth. They had phone booths at that time. I had kids on vacation and I had to get away from them and actually listen. I had to dial in to a committee meeting. And so I had that meeting. I got the message. And later, that was 2001, I said, okay, to my team, let's start looking for other opportunities. We decided, so I didn't find one until 2002 and then closed it in 2003, but I decided with my boss at the time and my colleagues that we were going to start actively looking. We hadn't really built out the team, but 2002 would be the beginning, that would be the inception. The birth would be with our first deal in 2003, and then the business just absolutely flourished. And to answer your first question about the success that I had, it was a little bit of skill and a lot of luck. I was coming into this at the right time. Now let's understand. Renewable energy, at the time we called it alternative energy. Renewable energy was not yet the buzzword, and then it became clean energy and climate tech, and there were so many different monikers for it. But at the time, it was brand new. There was not a lot of scale available. The size of the market was less than 1% of the size of the market today. So
back then,
when you look at the size of the market today in the U.S. alone,
it's globally 400 times bigger.
It's roughly about 400 times bigger, and so, like I said, less than 1%. It was.
Wow.
You've read my article, so you know.
I did my homework.
You did your homework, okay. And so less than 1%. There was not a lot of places to go, and so it turned out, and again, it was just the twist of fate that I ended up being one of the pioneers by coming up with financial instruments to enable capital to latch on to this slowly growing movement. But why was I lucky? Sort of coming in the beginning, and sometimes beginnings could be a very bad place to be, but very critical is it's an energy business. And at that time, energy inflation was starting to ripple through the economy. Natural gas prices were going up, electricity prices were going up, and so we were coming in at a time in the market when there was tremendous demand for energy. This is all before 2008. This is in the golden years of 2003 to 2007, and markets were going in one direction. And so unbeknownst to me, I was like a little surfer, riding on this wave that kept on going up, and I didn't realize that I had a whale underneath me that was just carrying me up, and that whale was energy demand.
That's incredible.
Yes.
So then you start, how long were you at Goldman after the deployment of these renewable energy plays? Like, did it take you, it was shortly after you left and started Hudson?
Yes, that's right. So it went, I ended up doing, I made, I think, 7 investments while I was at Hudson, and again, unbeknownst to me, I had a good team, we were picking good opportunities, but when I say unbeknownst to me, I knew that these investments were good. But I'm going to give you a little insight into this. I ended up putting $1.5 billion to work at Goldman, and my portfolio generated several $1 billion in profit the year after I left. Had I known that, I would have stayed and collected a bonus check. But when at this time, I believe that if Lloyd was not yet, he was president of the bank, I briefed him, I remember this vividly, I briefed him on my portfolio and a particular investment that I made in First Solar to get approval. And I said, I think we're going to make $30 to $50 million on this investment of $75 million. And it turned out, and again, I'm piecing together all from public records. So
100% return though on this deal?
No, way more than that. It was about 14x return.
In 2 years?
In less than 2 years, yes.
Wow.
Less than 2 years, yes. And so I knew this was something special. There's no way that you can have that kind of prescience to be able to figure all this out. Maybe some people could, I didn't. And so I was just planning to have a good return that turned out to be exceptional. When I bought control of Horizon, it was actually Zilker Renewable Energy. We renamed it as Horizon Wind. It turned out to be the quintessential, the prototype of a private equity takeover of a renewable energy developer. And again, we made over $1 billion on that, around $1 billion on that transaction. And it was all a result of the momentum that had
Incredible.
been built up through multiple avenues. But we were just simply we were in the right place at the right time,
Yep.
Learning by doing. No one at that time had total mastery of all the technologies, of all the financing tools, and we were creating them along the way. The third major investment that I made, it actually started out as being very small, but it was historic, was in a company called SunEdison. And SunEdison's vision was, we're going to be the Con Edison of solar, and we're going to create a solar utility. So in order to sell electricity, basically on a wholesale basis, you need what's called a power purchase agreement.
Okay.
So we ended up being the architects with SunEdison of a solar PPA. Versions of that PPA have been used around the United States for hundreds of billions of dollars of transactions. We were the first ones. I credit the team at SunEdison. We met them at a time when there were 4 people in the business. They grew. They ultimately, a couple of years later, they went public, and they went up to about a $10 billion market cap before others took over. I was dealing with a group that ultimately was not in control at the time of their bankruptcy, but just skyrocketed. And then ultimately, because of the weight that they built onto their platform with too much money, when the markets took a nosedive, they went out of business. So we saw the ups and downs, and were early pioneers in all sorts of, in all parts of the sector, mostly solar and wind, but some of the other aspects of renewable energy as well.
Is there one that's better than the other, or more cost effective than the other, solar versus wind?
It's a tough question to answer. First of all,
or is it situational?
You have to look at this as a puck that's moving. So you can judge based upon if you're good at, like Wayne Gretzky is, to figure out where the puck is going. 15 years ago, I didn't know how low cost it would be, but I predicted, even in congressional testimony, that it was going to come down really fast. So when I started in the business, basically solar power plants were being installed at about $10 to $12 a watt. Today, if you're really cost effective in the United States, you can get it done for $1 a watt. It hovers around there, a little bit more, a little bit less. And so the costs have come down tremendously. Wow. If you look at, the reason why it's a little bit of a complicated question to answer is because you have to determine whether you're at utility scale, you're in what's called, which is the big plants, whether you're doing the medium-sized plants that are either small utility or commercial scale that goes on rooftops of commercial buildings, shopping centers, et cetera, or at the home. So overall, Lazard puts out, actually last week they came out with this, or earlier this week, they came out with a report that they do annually. I think it's their 25th edition, where they look at the levelized cost of electricity. It's called LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, all across all types of generation sources, coal, wind, oil, natural gas, et cetera, and solar and everything. And solar and wind come out almost neck and neck for the lowest cost at utility scale. And here's where it gets more complicated, because that's called intermittent. So there's 3 types of power. I'm giving you a crash course. Basically 3 types of power. The first, we start off with base load. It's always on. In some cases you can shut it off for a while for maintenance, but it's always on, 24/7. Then there's firm, which is available and whenever you want it, right? But it's not there 24/7.
You got to tap into it.
You have to tap into it. So that's what's called firm power. And then there's intermittent. So if the wind's not blowing, you're not going to get wind. At night, you're not going to get sunshine basically hitting and creating the electricity effect using photonic energy from the sun. And so that's called intermittent. So what Lazard does is they add on top of that another factor to go from intermittent to firm, which is more valuable power. Even there, cost competitive, straight with natural gas.
With like modern day infrastructure, is everything's running on firm, I'm assuming, with a backup of some sort of Intermittent? Like, what is Florida's grid?
So Florida uses, they have a phenomenal, very diverse system. They are, Florida Power and Light, and actually their parent Next Energy is the largest owner of wind and solar in the United States. They don't only own in Florida, they own across the country.
Wow.
But they manage diverse resources. And so their resource planning measures on a real-time basis, basically minute to minute and even in more compressed intervals, the demand that's coming and the supply, the generation is called load for the demand and for the generation that's coming. So it's
taking my notes here.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of people, particularly folks in Washington, tend to overgeneralize around this, but there are many systems and grid operators that are able to operate with some amount of baseload power,
yeah,
and then some amount of firm and some amount of intermittent. And if you think about it, now if we have a cloudy day today, right, all of a sudden the clouds came over, you would have less generation, but the heat's also going down a little bit, right? It's going to get, so the air conditioners may not be quite as strained, and the people, when they come home, they're going to turn on their lights at night, they're going to watch TV. There's basically, the point is that load varies throughout the day. It's dynamic.
And weather.
And weather always throughout the day. So it's not the case that if you have all baseload power, that's going to be perfect for the demands of a utility to service their customers, because it goes up and down throughout the day. And so what you really need is a dynamic profile to be able to serve customers. And that's why, particularly when renewables are paired with batteries or other forms of backup power, they serve utilities and they serve customers very well.
That is an incredible mouthful, Neil. I'm learning a lot right now. This is like a college course right here.
I'm going to test you after.
Yeah, okay. I'm taking it all in.
So let me back up a little bit here. So about a month ago, I was invited to give a speech at a summit, at a conference that accompanied UN Climate Week in Panama.
Okay.
And I had been interested in trees as a way to solve the global CO2 problem for some time, but I was ignoring it because pretty much everyone else was. And I go back in this to about 2009, when I was invited by the Prince of Wales to join his rainforest project.
Wow.
And so I attended a few meetings. I didn't get deeply involved, but I was fascinated by the concept of basically saving trees as a way to lower CO2 emissions, because basically the seventh grade chemistry is that photosynthesis is the planet's natural filtration system to get rid of CO2.
Yep.
Right? What plants do and trees is they ingest CO2, and that's how they grow. So if you want to balance the world's ecosystem of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, having more trees is good. But for some reason, the world wasn't really that focused on it. They were trying to outlaw the internal combustion engine. They were it was always understood that this was a possibility, but the attention was driven by the world's policymakers and political forces.
Yep.
To focus on getting off of fossil fuels. And I had always, as a conservative, because I am a conservative, I was always repelled by the idea of telling people what they have to do, to restricting people's choice. I'd rather ride the horse in the direction it's running, figure out how to make that more efficient. And that's just a natural orientation that I have as a human, and just figuring out how to solve problems. So telling someone to stop smoking, you can warn them to do that, but you may want to give them other reasons to want to reduce, to quit, right? And just outlawing, basically sometimes it'll create more interest, particularly among young people. So the same thing here that I was feeling about outlawing the internal combustion engine, which is still a big debate today, obviously what's going on with California and their emissions rules, politically very much against it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because I remember before, and I don't know if it's changed. I remember a few years ago there was something that the Biden administration put in that by 2030 that 2/3 of the vehicles had to be all EV.
Yeah, it's referred to as the tailpipe emission rules, and I'm not saying that there's a valid argument to that, but again, politically, I'm more into freedom than I am into restriction. I'm more into carrots than I am sticks. And so I didn't like it. So basically, to make a long story short, I have this opportunity to speak to a very important group, and I decided that I'm not going to take an opportunity. I will take the opportunity not to come up with a small idea, but a really big one.
Yeah.
And I gave a speech there 4 weeks ago, and I had already been planning some of this stuff, but I basically had 4 points. I'm going to go through them with you. One is the world should keep on using the existing renewables that have already reached scale. Okay. Wind and solar. Wind and solar today globally are around 15 to 16% of the world's electricity, or all the world's electricity that's being used comes from wind and solar, both in the United States and globally. So anyone who thinks of this as being a green scam or something, it is the cheapest source of electricity, and it's already 15%. And if you combine all renewables, it's about 30%. In the US, a little bit less than that. In the US, about 30% globally, and that includes hydro, for example. And so it's already in the trillions of dollars in terms of capital investment. So my first point was keep on using it, because the more you use it, the more costs go down. There's what's called a learning curve or learning rate, where the more you use it, the smarter you become at bringing costs down. Yeah. And that has been remarkable. That's why today, the costs are down about 90+% over 15 years ago, and they keep on dropping. So keep on investing. That was my point number one. Point number two was there are some emerging technologies. Let the market decide, but I tend to have 3 favorites, more or less in this order. Basically hydrogen, not the type of hydrogen that's been used. I won't get into the details because we'll get off track, but green hydrogen, which I do think has a lot more promise. Basically hot rock geothermal, and small modular reactors, nuclear reactors. Now, for all of these 3 sources, I said we have to invest in it, even though the costs are high. We need to invest in them because the costs will come down. They'll follow the same pattern. The pattern is the more you invest, the more the costs come down.
The more you can learn about it.
The more you learn about it, but right now, anyone who thinks that next year we can put up a small modular reactor is really foolish. It's going to take probably about 10 years before we're at scale. Everyone else is talking about it. I'm saying it's going to take time.
So in 10 years, do you think that 15% will be 50?
For wind and solar, we'll see where the market goes. I'm a big believer. Look, I can have my view. I want the market to decide.
Of course. No, I'm just curious, as like maybe 20 years ago, did you think it would reach 15% by 2025?
I definitely saw the potential for that, absolutely, which is why I've been doing what I'm doing. Will it be 90+%? I think I don't want to outlaw fossil fuels. I want fossil fuels to flourish, but I'm going to get to my key point that you asked about trees in 1 second. So basically my point number 2 was these 3 technologies they have massive potential, and they are clean baseload power, which is amazing. We have that intermittent stuff. We've got the batteries to firm them up, and then we have baseload power, absolutely carbon-free, or pretty close there too. The third point I said is, why are we not focusing on trees? There are species of trees that are incredibly CO2 absorbent, and we're going to use the world's natural CO2 filtration system, but at scale. So let's understand what we're talking about. There are 3 trillion trees on the planet.
3 trillion
That's
trees.
How many trees there are on the planet. I didn't count them all, but you can
Somebody did.
Someone did, okay?
Google Maps, maybe.
Google Maps, right. And so, but if you look at certain species of plants, and there are several of them, but my favorite is the Paulownia tree. That's Paul and own, Paulownia tree. It is at least 10 times more efficient at filtering out carbon from the atmosphere because it grows very quickly. There are certain problems with it that the team I'm working with are solving, but it is in general a phenomenal way to solve the world's CO2 problem. So I announced basically 4 weeks ago, and I'll share with you, we'll soon be going more public with it, a business dedicated to solving CO2 without telling people what car to drive and whether they should use coal or natural gas or oil, whatever, because at scale, we can reduce annual CO2 emissions by close to 30% by using only approximately 0.3% of the world's landmass. So right now, roughly 30% of the world's landmass consists of forest. Okay. So we take only 1%, right? If you take here 30%, we're going to now go down to 3%, and we're going to 0.3%. So that's 1% of forests. Okay. And we dedicate it to high growth, high CO2 absorbent trees. We will reach our 2050 objectives. It's going to take time to build this infrastructure, but we can solve it all without telling people what to drive and what fuel source to be using. And that liberates people to make their own choices. I still believe that renewable energy or zero carbon energy is going to be good because they scale, because the economies of scale are extremely promising, and we're already in wind and solar at parity with fossil fuels. We need a lot more energy. So let it all hang out, let everyone run, and let's solve the world's CO2 problem by basically increasing the filtration capacity of the planet. And that was the big idea. I'm not the only one to have it, but I presented it, and jaws were dropping at the summit. But my fourth point, and I'll stop right then. My fourth point got the most attention. I also said at this summit, I said, look guys, the folks in my world, right? I'm a minority. I'm not an outlier that I'm conservative, but progressives tend to dominate the conversation, and what they're trying to do is stop fossil fuel production. And I said to the crowd at the time, I said, look, there's roughly, the way I calculate, these are my own numbers, roughly about $150 trillion of global net worth tied up in recognized reserves of natural gas and oil. Stop fighting. We're a tiny fraction of that, tiny fraction in terms of this community. Stop shaming basically the largest owners of the world's wealth. 150 trillion is a major percentage of the world's total wealth.
Huge.
Work with them, don't alienate them, don't ostracize them, don't shame them, but effectively let's declare a peace treaty and let's work together and not shame people from using fossil fuels. Because if we can solve it through forestry and other forms basically of biodiversity, this is a bigger subject, but trees are number one tool, then we're going to stop fighting and we're going to be much more aligned. And that would solve all the political problems going on in Washington today.
I was just going to say, you seem very balanced for the sector that you're in, that you're saying, no, you can still, internal combustion's fine.
Yes.
You can still use fossil fuels.
Yes.
I'm not trying to control or tell you guys what to do. I feel like you have like a very fair stance.
I do.
That's why you're so likable, Neil.
Well, thank you for saying that. Thank you for that. I will tell you that a lot of my colleagues in the industry will agree with me wholeheartedly. I'm not sure how many will go on camera to agree with this.
Yeah.
A lot of people still have to kind of run with the crowd.
You're the pioneer in many regards.
Well, I'm not a pioneer, but I think if I had to describe why I'm pretty decent at what I do, I'm a truth seeker. I'm trying to figure out what's the right answer, not just what's the politically correct answer. And so I search for ground truth, and I'm always balanced. If you sit with me in an investment committee meeting, I am, this is an old...
I'd love to, if that's an invitation, by the way.
It's an invitation. We'd have to bind,
I'll sign my NDA.
We'd have to bind and gag you here and make sure you didn't know where you were. But if we did that, that skill was honed as a lawyer. There's an old saying that lawyers have to have two hands because they have on the one hand and on the other hand. And that's the way lawyers think.
Yeah.
That's also the way investors think. It's really understanding, it's sort of like what's called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's just a natural skill set that investors develop.
Is that what you use to analyze any deal?
Almost everything, yeah, absolutely.
The SWOT acronym.
SWOT, absolutely. So, but SWOT with an O. And that's how we think about it. And so that's the way I've been approaching this. I spent years studying, again, not like I was in college, but studying climate science to make sure that I believed
Yeah.
based upon study, not because of religious conviction, in the science of climate change. And I understand its strengths and I understand its weaknesses. So I can have a conversation with someone on the left and someone on the right and someone in the middle,
yeah.
and hold my own.
So you've often said too that the most undervalued asset is just the natural resources on this earth. Aside from trees, is there any other part of the natural minerals or something in the earth that you're like, there is something there that we can utilize to lower the carbon footprint?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating question.
I put some thought into this, Neil. I want you to know that.
You're doing great. You're prompting me to be going deeper in my.
I'm making you think deeper. I don't want it to be a surface level solar wind conversation.
You're doing great. We're digging deep here. So there are a lot of people giving a lot of thought to the blue economy, basically thinking through basically our oceans and natural habitat more broadly, to understand how, because another source of carbon dioxide ingestion and oxygen expulsion are the world's oceans, right? And so it's more than just trees, but trees happen to be more CO2 efficient, particularly the species that I've identified. The problem that we have, and this is something, again, I'm going to share something that some people that are listening to this are going to go, aha. The problem with that movement is that if you put a value on every aspect of God's green earth, you turn out to have no value left in the currency. Unless this is how Bitcoin works, this is how the Federal Reserve works, controlling supply of money, controlling the amount of money in circulation, controlling, basically that enhances its ability to be a store of value, to be able to use it as a currency. If everything is valuable that actually takes in CO2 or enhances our environment, if everything is valuable, then nothing is valuable, because effectively the supply and demand, you start charging for air. It's impossible to manage. So this community, and I'm now considering myself one of them, have not figured that out perfectly. I actually started talking at the conference to people about that, and I was getting a lot of blank stares. Can you imagine if Bitcoin operated so that there were not 21 million Bitcoins? You can create them ad infinitum.
Well, then it would defeat the purpose of scarcity.
Exactly.
Right, so then it would.
Scarcity is part of what creates
the
value.
Demand and the value.
Why is gold valuable? Why are diamonds valuable? Why is real estate? Real estate, there's plenty of real estate, it's still finite, but living here in Bal Harbour, there's a scarcity value associated with it which creates value. So we have to figure out how to balance, how to treasure nature, but not necessarily put a carbon value on everything. And so I don't have the answers. The most important thing that I've learned is to actually understand the right questions to ask. And so hopefully we'll emerge with a system that actually creates the right checks and balances there.
God, I'm learning a lot right now. I'm trying to take it all in, and also, I guess my next question, Neil, with like government policies from administration to administration, do you feel like the government is spending enough time and energy on writing policies and giving tax breaks to it now? Is it like, are you happy with what they're doing? Do you feel like they need to do a lot more or a little bit more? Is it a good balance? Like,
it's right now we're in what I like to refer to as we're seeing Newton's third law of motion in action in Washington, D.C. What does that mean? Basically, Newton's third law of motion is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So a lot of what's going on, there is absolutely legitimate cause for concern about the deficit. The Inflation Reduction Act was quite generous to our sector, and there are areas to cut back, but that's not really what's happening in Washington. All the fervor around the green scam is itself a scam. There's nothing scammy about the fact that renewable energy is the fastest way, particularly wind and solar, is the fastest way to get electrons on the grid today.
In other words, create energy.
And particularly grid energy, and particularly what's so paradoxical is that behind the meter energy, which means that energy that the utilities don't have to dispatch, because the utilities need to serve the growing needs of AI data centers. Massive demand. So can you imagine having a conversation in Washington happening at the same time? How in the world are we going to get more electrons onto the grid to service the needs of AI data centers, which are enormous, without causing price inflation, and at the same time basically cutting off at the knees the sources of electricity that happen to produce solar and batteries? Last year were 84% of all additions to the grid, all additions, 84%. Period. 84%. You add wind, it was like up to 92% or more than that. And so we need to, and there are transition rules right now that are being written in the reconciliation bill, but there's more of a desire to have this equal and opposite reaction to the IRA, which was passed in 2022, called the Inflation Reduction Act. It did not, forget about what it did for inflation, to reducing inflation, but it definitely was a stimulus shock to the system to build more energy, and we've benefited for that as a country. And so the costs have come down. We have more manufacturing that are being basically onshored. We have hundreds of billions of dollars being invested, being committed to build it. And so the reason why this is happening today is because the Democrats did it without a single Republican vote. And so they're now going to have their day to get back at the Democrats by not having one Democrat vote. And they're going to have their field day. What's going to end up happening is they're going to try to add more electrons to the grid.
They, as in
the Republican, the administration,
do you
Congress.
think, not to cut you off, do you think there's more influence or more, are they more adversary on the Republican side or the Democratic side? Or do you feel like it's balanced with?
Look, I'm a Republican. I voted for Trump. I can't remember the last time I voted for a Democrat. But it doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything.
Of course.
I have my own mind. I could think things through. And I don't even consider myself a moderate. I'm a conservative. But on certain issues, based upon my expertise and experience, I come at it in a different way. I have, if you read everything that I've written on the subject, I have just as many problems with people on the progressive side, on the left, and the way that they think about these issues, that I do on the right. So at the end of the day, it's not that I'm in the middle. I'm trying to think through the right policies to incentivize capital formation, to bring costs down, and to proliferate energy.
To grow the big picture. It doesn't matter.
That's what I'm focused on. And I have patience for all, but ultimately, what I would hope is that they would focus on problem solving rather than score settling. And that is what I'm seeing right now.
I agree with you.
There's too much score settling, not enough. This green scam nonsense.
Can I?
Just makes no sense.
You've brought that up a couple of times, so I know that you're passionate about that, and somebody obviously, you've heard it 100 times. I would love to have someone who calls it a scam to come in and we'll talk about all of the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent. Of course, you would school all the electrons that are going into the grid, and explain to me where the scam is. Are there excesses? Absolutely. In every business, and
I have already made recommendations to people on the Hill on how to cut. I've had conversations with leaders on the Hill on how to cut some of the fat to keep what's most important. Now, I also agree in deficit reduction. Both parties are guilty of driving up deficits. But what I will say is this: smart industrial and economic policy will drive up growth and will solve deficits. And so electricity is energy generally, but electricity, since we are electrifying our economy, no question about it, electricity is the key to economic growth. And if we are not adding enough electrons fast enough and at low cost, and we're going to start driving up inflation, we're going to start crimping economic growth. So the main focus should be on growing our economy as the primary way, and electricity is it. And so there are ways to curb some of the excesses. In general, the Senate did a little bit better job than the House at getting there. There's still changes that need to be made, but Congress and the administration should be focused on electrons of all stripes. I don't care if they're green, they're brown, they're blue, it doesn't matter. Just get them all on board. And the way that they're going about it is inconsistent with that goal.
Do you feel like there's too many the flow of getting something passed, do you feel like there's too many opinions and too many steps?
Well,
with a bunch of people that are not even qualified to speak on said subject or said subjects at all?
That's the sausage factory in DC. It's always been. But it's more than that. It's not too many voices, it's too much money. Basically, this is where this is where the money is really important to getting your way. So I'm not saying that politicians are just responding here, but obviously people with bigger wallets can have bigger influence.
So let's talk about the reinvention of sustainable platform.
Yes.
One of the questions I have is, you're restructuring Hudson Sustainable Group in 3 distinct businesses. What's driving that evolution? I know you may have touched on it a little bit, if you want to maybe just summarize for the viewers, but I kind of wanted to, because I have here the merchant banking, technical consulting, government affairs, and how they can connect.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna I'll describe it a little bit differently, but here I go. So there was there's both a negative and a positive here. On May 22nd, when the House passed this reconciliation bill, they knocked out some very exciting business activity that I was engaged in, and that was obviously very disappointing. And I realized here that as a result of all of the benefits that were available to businesses coming from the IRA, that I had gotten, quote unquote, in trade speak, too long.
Yeah.
Connected to the IRA, and I needed to retool the business so that it was much more balanced and less susceptible to whichever way the wind's blowing, metaphorically, in Washington. And so go back to basics and actually try to balance out my portfolio of businesses to be less prone to tax credits or benefits, because I'm an investor. I don't have a tax base, but obviously business was tremendously aided by all those credits. So number one was diversify away from IRA related activity. That was number one.
Got it.
Number two, I had realized here, and gradually, and sometimes you don't realize that you're in a business until sometime after you're in the business. And I realized that earlier this year, I was actually getting into the business of giving advice. People had always been coming to me for advice and check. And so since my days at Goldman, I was always a check writer. Yeah. But now I found myself in the business of giving advice just because people were coming to me and for a check. So what I decided to do here is, look, I can use third-party capital for the checks. There's plenty of that capital, but my advice, given 23 years in the business, basically looking at 15,000 investment opportunities, roughly. Not precise, I can't tell you that I can count.
But 10,000 plus, let's just say 10,000
more than 10,000 for sure.
Wow. So it's a daily thing.
So this was daily. This had gone, I've been in business for now, between Goldman and 23 years. There were many weeks that I'm seeing 15, 20, 25 deals a week.
Wow.
And so the pattern recognition of seeing that, of being in the industry, of investing billions of dollars, of seeing businesses succeed and fail and then rehabilitate, et cetera, have given me pattern recognition that is almost impossible to obtain by just going to school or working in this industry for a year or two. And so that's not only been invaluable to me, but I want to give that to clients. And so right now we're now building up our advisory business. We're going to be announcing soon some additions to our business to fortify that capability of giving advice. I don't want to reveal it until it's all negotiated and done, but we're going to be building a much bigger advisory practice, which will be strategic, financial, HR, technical, government affairs, and even software related. And one of my mandates is to help someone develop cutting edge software for our sector. And so I want to bring a wide array of skills, package them on a customized basis for clients that need that advice, charge for the advice, and then get success fees. So that's part one of the business. Part two we started about a year ago, is to build out a private credit business, which basically means it's direct lending. Private credit is the biggest. If you divide our sector, our world, into equity, bonds, and loans. Okay?
Yeah.
Basically, loans are is by far the largest part of the capital stack of the $100 to $200 billion a year that flows in our sector. Most of it is credit, most of it is private debt, most of it is bank debt right now, but it's actually moving towards private credit solutions, so it's a growing market. And given the expertise that we have as a firm and my team as individuals, we're getting into that business. We're quite busy, but we want to grow that platform. And then third, we're maintaining a leg into the venture world, but really only when we either found or co-found a business, mostly it's done in partnership, where we're focusing on a big opportunity that no one else is focusing on, or if they're doing it, they're not doing it in the way that we think could be optimized. And so we have a venture business as well. And that's where our tree project is located. We have another effort here that we're hopefully within a few weeks we're going to be able to make a public announcement about. And so that occupies a smaller part of Hudson today. It was much bigger, and I've launched many successful companies and a few unsuccessful companies. I mean, everyone, so all of that now represents Hudson.
Incredible. Well, I know you're not going to be done anytime soon because you're going to work until you're 150. But what is the, I don't know if the better question is what's Hudson's 5-year goal or 10-year goal, but I'll let you explain. I know you have things timed in your head on like where you want it to be. What is the vision in the next 5 to 10 years?
My vision for the next 5 to 10 years is twofold. First of all, to continue to have an impact, and for that impact to be bigger over the next 5, 10 years than it was over for my career, the last 25 years. And so the space is getting bigger, and therefore I want to seize that opportunity to increase the ability of the firm to drive impact. Some of the things that we've talked about in this little discussion have tremendous promise to deliver impact. I also want it to be less dependent upon me. I have a great team. I'm looking to expand my team in key areas and to drive the next generation of leadership, so that in case I want to slow down between now and the 150.
The bus is still running.
The bus is still running, absolutely.
I love that. Okay, let's pivot into entrepreneurship. I'm sure you've been pitched by hundreds of founders and been around some of the greatest minds ever. I don't know if there's like an Elon Musk, Bill Gates, any top 10 billionaire that you've met or interacted with that you want to share, but what's one characteristic or trait that you think they all have and that you have? Because I'm not there yet, but I've had some success, and I try and tell other people that are younger than me like what they have to do. And I don't think they understand the level of obsession and just sheer work ethic that goes into it. But I'm curious, and I'm sure there'll be more validity if it's coming from you. But what are, I don't know, 2 or 3 traits that you've noticed that all these big successful people have?
Well, by the way, I did meet Elon Musk once.
Wow,
actually,
really?
Unfortunately, I turned down Tesla a couple of times, and just a quick aside here, I'll answer your question. We were debating between investing in Fisker, you can go back, Fisker, and Tesla, and we couldn't decide whether we wanted an all EV, an all electric vehicle, or a hybrid, and we decided to do neither. So that's a little bit, so that was an opportunity lost. I actually met Elon in a conference room with his Goldman bankers, I think it was the Goldman bankers, back in December 2009, and he writes in his book, which I do have upstairs next to my bed.
I noticed that.
That I have read parts of his book. I haven't gotten through the whole book yet. He's a fascinating study. Look, I mean, I can't imagine what goes on in his mind, and he's able to handle everything that he handles. But effectively, the ability to delegate effectively is really important. Resilience and the ability to learn quickly. So willingness to get up again after you experience failure. There is no one, basically, Thomas Edison had a famous saying that he finally learned how to create a light bulb by failing at it 999 times. So it was only on the 1,000th time that he did it. And so you have to be willing to fail and get up again. Rejection, failure meets iron will, determination, but the ability to learn. So the only way that Thomas Edison got there is he learned from all those 999 mistakes what he was doing wrong to ultimately get it right.
Yeah.
I've had that kind of experience. I don't have a Thomas Edison moment here, but I've obviously been at the right place at the right time to contribute to the way sustainable finance is executed today. So I'm very fortunate on that. The lessons I probably learned the most, and I don't read a lot of business books. I don't really have the time. I listen to a lot. I more listen to YouTube and a lot of great thinkers. Tony Robbins among them, but plenty of really great thinkers. I was just listening to a Steve Jobs clip right before you walked in today. But my favorite business book is Steve Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People.
Ah, okay.
And so, basically begin with the end in mind. Know where you're going. Reverse engineer. Sharpen the saw. There's a number of them. I still use those principles, even though I haven't picked up his book in probably 5 or 10 years, to drive the way that I run my business and my life. Sometimes more successfully than not. I'm sure that if Steve Covey were alive and he were guiding me, that he could do a better job coaching me. I have some great coaches around me. My COO is an individual who's had a very successful career as a CEO, president, and a consultant, Roy Camerano. Wow. I met him 15 years ago, and he said to me when we met that I've written several books about you before meeting you, and so so being able to learn from everyone, and being able to ask good questions, and know what you don't know. These are all incredibly important.
No, I love that you
aspects.
just said you have coaches, even with how successful you are. You still
absolutely.
read and still listen to Steve Jobs and Elon Musk or anybody.
Absolutely, listen
and
to
still
Elon
look
all
for
the time.
continuous inspiration.
Totally.
You beat me to it with what book to read. I guess to conclude, Neil, what is your legacy 200 years from now when someone searches your name on the internet and your family looks up to you, your kids? What do you want that Neil Auerbach was?
Most important here that my family will remember me for good.
Yep.
Right. So what happens in the work world? Obviously, do I want to make a difference in making the world a healthier place to live in, to creating more prosperity overall on the planet? Those are very, very important objectives. But most importantly is actually to have a loving family and to have children and grandchildren that follow my traditions, that ultimately are well-adjusted people. That is more important than anything else to me. And thank God I have 5 wonderful children. I have 11 grandchildren, and hopefully more on the way.
God bless.
So that's really that's really where the rubber hits the road for me right now.
And the pioneer of renewable energy.
I mean, absolutely. Look, I'll be in the history books perhaps as a footnote. So that all matters to me.
Yeah, of course.
But I put it in perspective.
Of course, 100%. I appreciate you doing this. Neil, where can everybody, if they want to follow along and look more into you and what you do, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is one. On my website is the best place to find me, on hudsonsustainable.com.
Okay.
I'm not on X. I'm not on Facebook or Instagram or anything, or any of those other social media.
We got to get you on Instagram first.
We'll have that conversation. You'll have that conversation with my team. They're encouraging me to stay away from it, but people can easily follow me through my website.
I love that. Neil, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Really
it's been an honor.
Thank you so much.